Daryl Recommends Podcast is a podcast recommending series and shouldn't be mistaken as a reviewing one. Opinions about each show are my own and should not reflect what each podcast has to offer. Content warnings aside, I believe if any recommendation in my series interests you, you should give it a chance, regardless of how I personally feel about the show.
Okay, so this just in, ladies and gentlemen. We've some truly breaking news. TruthCrusader.org has published all of the leaked tapes we've been reading about these last couple of days. After carefully examining the audio, our editors can confirm that most of the rumors appear to be true. There are segments on behavioral conditioning, neuroprepping, and even murder. Deca Group stock is plummeting right now, as they're preparing an official statement on the recordings. But whatever their explanation for these outrageous findings, one thing is clear. We were never meant to hear the Deca tapes.
We follow a series of tapes that detail the stories of 10 people who are locked together in the same place. All the answers of what happened and where they have went to have to be here somewhere. The Deca Tapes is an 8-episode sci-fi mystery podcast following the group of people with mysterious pasts and details for how they got to where they're at and where they are going. So the premise for the show is really interesting. I do want to preface by saying that this is a podcast that you should probably listen to blind. I did not know anything about the show other than I listened to it around the time that I first got accepted into the Rusty Quill Network. And it was on like a list of shows to listen to. And I decided to give it a listen after I had finished. I think I listened to it after or before I listened to Stellar Firma. It was one or the other. And I really enjoyed listening to it. It's a short story. There isn't a second season for it. It's only 8 episodes. So if you're somebody who doesn't really feel like listening to really long shows, this might be a good show for you, because it's just really short. And the mystery for this is really interesting. The concept is really interesting. Unfortunately, I don't want to say too much because this is one of those shows that I feel like if you go into it as blind as you can be, it makes it all the more interesting. I know there's people who don't care so much for spoilers, but I'm going to be a bit lenient with not lenient, I'm going to be a bit tight with the kind of spoilers that I talk about for this. But it's very good. It's very good. I enjoyed the characters, even if some of them were a bit more detestable than others. And the premise for this and how it kind of interconnects, like, the place that they're going to versus the place that they came from versus the place that these people are at is very interesting in the way they did it. Once again, I love sci-fi podcasts that just talk about how much they hate capitalism, or just any podcast in general. It doesn't have to be sci-fi, but sometimes it tends to be a sci-fi podcast. And the ending is really good. I very much enjoyed the ending of this show. It's one of those kind of like bittersweet ones. So if you're somebody who doesn't want like a super happy ending at your podcast, or at the very least an interesting ending to your podcast, then this might be a very good show for you. It's also, I think it's so funny that I just had this recommendation next on my list of recommendations, unintentionally planned because I just played Mouthwashing. So I'm going to say the story isn't exactly the same, but if you like Mouthwashing, you actually might like the Deca Tapes. It's sort of similar. It is like the vaguest of similarities, but when I saw the Deca Tapes as like the next podcast that I was going to recommend on my like to recommend list after I had recommended Camland, I was like, that's very funny because I just played Mouthwashing and it's not the exact same like kind of story, but it's also really funny. So take that as you will. Overall, for like content warnings though, if considering that I brought up Mouthwashing, it's not as like graphic as Mouthwashing is, which I don't think Mouthwashing is that much graphic of a game, but it's a really great short story. There is a murder that happens in the place that these people are at that is very prominent through like their storyline, but it's not like super graphic where we're like here. It's everything is like narrated as if it already happened. So we're hearing characters explain stuff that had already happened. So pseudo like how like the Magnus Archives does some of its horror. And however, there is the topics of slave labor or forced labor, and also like past tense talks about like people who have died and drug use and things like that. So if that's stuff you're sensitive with, it doesn't happen in the first person while the show is happening. It's all stuff that has happened in the past. But overall, I really enjoyed this show. This is gonna be one of my shorter videos just because it's such a short show where if I went into too much detail about some of the stuff that happens into it, it would start explaining like more of the mystery of what is happening and like spoiling things before like actually getting there, because I find the show very interesting if you start in blind and not knowing what to expect. And I would normally not be like so uptight with it if it wasn't an 8-episode show. If it was a longer show, I might be like, well, first off, this is where they're at, but not the case. I recommend go listening to it. I just hit my desk. I recommend go listening to it. If you enjoy it, let me know. If you don't, I'm sorry you didn't. I enjoyed it, and that's what matters to me at least. And I recommend these shows, hoping that maybe you guys can enjoy it. I will be linking to any other like social medias and whatnot that the creator of the show, Lex Noteboom, has. Any websites, maybe, I don't know if Lex does have some other shows as well, but I have not listened to them. So maybe you're a fan of Lex's other shows, but have never actually listened to the Deca tapes before. So I hope you enjoy, and goodbye.